protests, and plaudits. Anger around the Catholic high school students involved in a viral video. They're also finding support. We have a report from Covington, Kentucky. Transgender ban. The Trump administration is given a boost from the Supreme Court regarding one of its initiatives with the military. World Youth Day. The global Catholic event begins today. We're in Panama. And protecting the Pope. How the Swiss Guards are celebrating a milestone achievement. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, January 22nd, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Trump calls a group of Catholic high school students from Kentucky symbols of fake news and how evil it can be. The Covington Catholic classmates attended the March for Life in Washington, D.C. last week before they were swept up in a national controversy sparked by a viral video. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports from the school at the center of the debate in Park Hills, Kentucky, near Cincinnati. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Covington Catholic High School behind me has its doors locked. Classes were canceled today. You see the police car right behind me blocking the entrance. It's all because of security concerns. Administrators here have been coping with backlash after Friday's incident. Now, at the nearby diocesan headquarters, there was a protest today, and we're learning more about an incident that just blew up on social media.
This is the video that sparked so much outrage. At first glance, it appears Covington Catholic High School student Nick Sandman and his classmates were disrespecting a Native American drummer at the Lincoln Memorial. But other videos paint a much more complex picture. Members of the Black Hebrew Israelite movement first shouted racist slurs at the students wearing Make America Great Again hats. That's when Native American Nathan Phillips says he started banging his drum to diffuse tensions. The convergence of the three different groups was all caught on camera. President Trump tweeted, "Looking like Nick Sandman and his Covington Catholic students were treated unfairly with early judgments, proving out to be false. Smeared by media, not good, but making big comeback." The boys' representative in Congress, Thomas Massey, also sent a tweet saying, "Thank you, real Donald Trump, for supporting our Covington Catholic students." Representative Massey added on Facebook, "The honorable and tolerant students of Covington Catholic School came to D.C. to advocate for the unborn and to learn about our nation's capital. What they got was a brutal lesson in the unjust court of public opinion and social media mobs." President Trump says he knows the Catholic school students will turn this experience into something positive. He tweets, "It started off unpleasant, but can end in a dream."
Despite the encounter in D.C. and the emotions that followed it, the incident never became violent, but still threats of violence attracted a police presence here today outside Covington Catholic. So, Lauren, we'll be paying attention to see if the doors here open back up tomorrow.
White House correspondent Mark Irons reporting from Park Hills, Kentucky. Thank you, Mark. The partial government shutdown has reached its 32nd day. Republican senators press ahead with President Trump's proposal to end the stalemate and fund his border wall.
The president's made a comprehensive and bipartisan offer that would accomplish everything Democrats have said needs to be accomplished right now, immediately. It's a strong proposal. It's the only thing on the table.
But Democrats continue to say the government should reopen before negotiations can continue. Federal employees are facing another missed paycheck if the stalemate isn't broken soon. The Supreme Court allows the Trump administration to go ahead with its plan to restrict military service by transgender men and women. The High Court split 5-4. The policy can go into effect while the issue works its way through lower courts. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi is following the story from outside the Supreme Court. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. And just a few years ago, someone who was transgender could have been kicked out of the military. But President Obama allowed them to serve. President Trump reversed that. Some groups sued, but for now, the Trump administration policy can go into effect.
The Pentagon praises today's temporary decision. It says the policy is based on professional military judgment and will ensure that the U.S. Armed Forces remain the most lethal and combat-effective fighting force in the world. But liberal legal groups like the Constitutional Accountability Center told the Supreme Court the government may not subject any group of persons to adverse treatment born of animosity toward the class of persons affected. The Trump administration's policy allows transgender people to serve according to their biological sex. It also allows exceptions for transgender troops who began changing their genders under President Obama's rules. Over 900 troops have been diagnosed with gender dysphoria or discomfort with their biological sex. Catholic scholar Mary Rice Hassan tells me not everyone is qualified for military service.
It takes a particular skill set, a particular set of qualities to be able to serve in order to serve and accomplish the purposes of the military.
Hassan says the Obama policy is an attempt to change the culture.
The purpose of this suit is to force a change in the culture and in the law that says we're not male or female, that our identity is key to how we feel.
Groups suing over the Trump policy call it a cruel obsession. Now, the cases are still working their way through the lower courts, and the Catechism of the Catholic Church says that God created the human beings male and female, and each person should really accept his or her sexual identity. It's a teaching, Lauren, that Pope Francis has reiterated.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi. Thank you, Jason. More than 100,000 young people are expected to arrive in Panama City for a massive Catholic youth festival called World Youth Day. But a group of prisoners can't make the trip, so the pontiff is going to them. The inmates are rehearsing for an encounter with the Holy Father. It's expected to last about an hour, and this will be the first time the Pope will hear confessions in a prison. World Youth Day starts tomorrow and wraps up on Sunday. Ursula Murua is Director of Digital Strategy and Social Media for EWTN News. She joins us from Panama City. Ursula, you just landed in Panama. What's the mood there?
Well, it's amazing. You know, you have to be here, Lauren, to feel the warmth, to feel the joy of these people coming from all over the world. You see colorful delegations with flags and mascots. It's really impressive. For the Panamanians, this is their World Cup, their Olympics, everything. It's the main event they are hosting in the last decade at least.
You're right at the press center behind you, and you said it's about 90 degrees. It's 11 here in Washington, just saying. When Pope Francis arrives in Panama tomorrow, he will be the first Latin American pontiff to visit Central America. What issues do you expect him to highlight?
Well, here people are expecting to listen to him, to see him. Most people here will have the first chance in their lives to see a pope. The last time they hosted a pope visit, it was back in 1983 when Pope John Paul II, Saint John Paul II came to the country. So these people are eager to meet him, to listen to him. They are coming not only from the other countries, they are also coming to Panama City from other cities. You know, you can see families coming together. They expect a lot of people for the final mass, especially Panamanians.
The Pope almost always makes visits to prison. He did when he came here. Why is that? Where is he going there in Panama?
Well, he will be in the city, in the main city, the capital, Panama City, but he will also go to a prison, to a young detention center, which is 25 miles from here, because he wants to visit these kids who are not able to come and see him in the main events. So he will be there. You know, he's always preaching about going to the peripheries to bring the gospel to the people who are far away from the church. In this case, the periphery will be that prison. These kids they have been working for several weeks in their gifts that they want to give the Pope, and they are expecting to listen from him a message of hope.
I understand there are about 144 of them, and one of them, a young teen, committed a double homicide, and he will be speaking with the Pope. Ursula Murua, Director of Digital Strategy for Social Media for EWTN News.
Thank you, Lauren.
According to its own annual report, the number of abortions performed by Planned Parenthood is on the rise. Planned Parenthood clinics performed, and here are the exact numbers, 332,757 abortions. That's from 2017 to 2018. And here's the kicker. It's an increase of 11,373 abortions from the year before. We're going to have analysis of this new report coming up later in our broadcast with the National Review's Alexandra DeSanctis. Israel says it's reached a major milestone in developing an advanced missile defense system. The Israeli military announced a successful missile test just one day after claiming responsibility for a series of airstrikes in Syria. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee has more from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says his country will go after anyone who tries to hurt the Jewish state. That includes Iran, who Netanyahu says tried to attack Israel first. The U.S. is backing Israel, which promises to keep up the airstrikes as long as it feels threatened. This video, released by Syrian state media, shows its military intercepting Israeli missiles near Damascus. Syria's government claims to have destroyed most of the missiles before they reach their targets. But the Israeli military says they successfully hit Iranian militias who are using Syria as a base to attack the Jewish state. Reports say 11 were killed, including 4 Syrian troops.
Syria is now paying the price for allowing Iran its expansionist policies from Syrian soil.
Israel says the raid on Syria was a response to a rocket they claim Iranian forces fired at an Israeli ski resort Sunday. A tourist filmed Israel's Iron Dome missile defense intercepting the rocket. The ski resort is located in the Golan Heights, a highly disputed area both Israel and Syria claim as their own. Syrian lawmakers in Damascus deny Israel's airstrikes were aimed at Iranian military targets.
وين الإيرانيين بالموضوع هون؟ لا يوجد إيرانيين، هو يعني مطارات للشعب وللجيش العربي السوري.
This member of Syria's parliament insisting there are no Iranians in the region. But the Israeli prime minister is not backing down.
חזקות מאוד מן המתקדמות בעולם.
Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel will take action against Iran and against the Syrian forces who are helping Iran. The Prime Minister is striking a much tougher tone compared to years past. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the Trump administration fully supports Israel's right to defend itself. Now, all of this happens to come at the same time the United States is removing all of its troops from Syria. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. Thank you, Wyatt. ISIS continues to carry out assassinations in Iraq, despite having lost all of its territory more than 1 year ago. Security is an ongoing issue, especially in Mosul. Officials say terrorists are able to operate by pretending to be police. The Iraqi army is supposed to provide security in this area, but one resident says the military and government are not around. The American arrested in Moscow on suspicion of being a spy appeared in court today. Paul Whelan's lawyer says he had classified Russian documents on him when he was detained, but did not know it and never looked at them. The judge ordered Whelan to remain in jail until at least the end of next month. Coming up, the Vatican releases new guidelines on how to fight human trafficking. The Vatican is insisting it never received a report of sexual abuse against an Argentine bishop close to Pope Francis. Spokesman Alexandra DeSanctis says the Holy See received the first accusations of alleged sexual abuse by Archbishop Gustavo Sanchetta a few months ago. Sanchetta resigned suddenly from his post in Argentina in 2017. He was then promoted to a job at the Vatican. His former deputy says he twice sent to Rome allegations of sexual abuse by the Archbishop, once in 2015 and again 2 years later. The Vatican releases new guidelines on how to combat human trafficking. Church officials say the purpose is to engage and prevent the crisis, nourished by reflection, prayer, and the teachings of Pope Francis. Father Michael Czerny, the Vatican's Undersecretary for Migrants and Refugees, joins us from Rome. Father, Pope Francis has called human trafficking an open wound of the body of contemporary society, a scourge upon the body of Christ. You published a book on the Holy Father's plea against human trafficking. How are these new guidelines going to help Catholic communities stop human trafficking?
Well, these guidelines are based on what especially Pope Francis has been saying, but also Pope Benedict and St. John Paul II. And so the guidelines pull together a lot of teaching that we already have, but will, in a way that parishes, dioceses, Catholic organizations can use it for planning how they will respond to this big challenge that we have everywhere in the world.
Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry, Father Czerny. Has the church made any progress in fighting it?
The church is making a lot of progress in, first of all, in recognizing that trafficking is a problem, which is something that has been kind of hidden. And secondly, especially thanks to the ministry of the sisters all over the world, reaching out and helping to liberate and rehabilitate victims of human trafficking. But it's the responsibility of governments to deal with a illegal, illicit and criminal business. That's not the church's job. And so that's the answer to your question. You ask the governments what they're doing to dismantle human trafficking and slavery.
Survivors of human trafficking must heal physically, psychologically, and spiritually. How does the church help them do that?
Well, in thousands of ways, because each person is different. Each person has been wounded in his or her dignity, has suffered traumas and abuses of all sorts of kinds. So there isn't a single form of rehabilitation. But we know that in community, in family, in worship and spirituality, and just in getting on with life, finding a job, getting a place to stay, maybe getting involved with other people in other projects. All of these things are ways of healing. And so that's what so many of us in the church can do to be of real help.
Father Michael Czerny, the Vatican's Undersecretary for Migrants and Refugees. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The University of Notre Dame will cover up murals on campus depicting Christopher Columbus in the New World. The Catholic school's president says the 12 works show Native Americans in stereotypical submissive poses. Last year, more than 300 students, employees, and alumni signed a letter calling for the paintings to be removed. They date from the 1880s and were intended to encourage immigrants during a period of anti-Catholic sentiment. Up next, Planned Parenthood says abortions are on the rise. We'll have a discussion. And after more than 500 years, there's something new about the Swiss Guard. Today is the 46th anniversary of Roe v. Wade. That's the landmark Supreme Court ruling that recognized the constitutional right to an abortion. Norma McCorvey, the Jane Roe in the case, later became Catholic and a pro-life supporter. As we mentioned earlier in the broadcast, Planned Parenthood says the number of abortions it performs is up year over year. And joining me now by satellite from New York City is Alexandra DeSanctis, staff writer for the National Review. Alexandra, welcome back to our broadcast.
Great to be with you.
You analyzed this Planned Parenthood report and you published your findings in National Review. You say that these are the highest numbers of abortions performed at Planned Parenthood clinics since 2011 and 2012. What does this say about Planned Parenthood's stated mission of providing health care for women?
You know, I think this is a really big piece of information and a piece of information in the puzzle here when they talk about abortion and they claim it's not what they do. They claim, you know, it's only 3% of their work, but in fact, abortion is the vast majority of what they do. Most other non-abortion services went down last year. They do very little aside from abortion. You know, they hand out contraception, they do some cancer screenings, but for the most part, they really are focused on abortion. And not only that, but they are by far the largest abortion provider in the entire country.
Yet the same annual report, in that Planned Parenthood states abortion accounts for 3.4% of what it calls medical services. What do you make of that number?
this statistic is highly misleading, and they've been pushing this for a very long time. Defenders of Planned Parenthood, Democratic politicians often push this line, and they find this in a kind of tricky way. So they inflate their services. Instead of calculating what percentage of their patients come in to get an abortion procedure, they define a service as a discrete clinical interaction, which means they can count anything. Handing a woman birth control on the way out the door, for example, could count as a service. And in doing that, they're able to make abortion look like a smaller piece of the overall pie than it actually is.
Let's take a look at some revenue numbers from the report. Planned Parenthood began the year with about $1.6 billion in net assets. They ended the year with close to $1.9 billion. It lists nearly $631 million in private contributions and bequests, and it lists its taxpayer funding in the form of reimbursements and grants at just under $564 million. Our Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi tried to get some answers from Planned Parenthood President Lena Wen last week ahead of the annual report release. Let's listen.
Why should the government give you another $500 million? Dr. Wen? Dr. Wen, as a medical doctor, when does life begin, would you say, Dr. Wen?
Dr. Wen didn't answer our questions. Alexandra DeSanctis, in your opinion, why is receiving government funding so important to Planned Parenthood, especially when just last week we saw the Knights of Columbus Marist poll show that 75% of Americans support tighter restrictions on abortion?
I think for Planned Parenthood, it's a lot less about the dollar amount, and it's a lot more about having the sort of public approval that comes from getting government funding. And they can point to themselves and say, look, we're a government-approved organization. We get federal funding because what we do is important to millions of American women. But if you look at their report, I think the opposite is true. They don't do very much real health care at all, and women can actually get much better care in thousands of federally qualified health care centers around the country without Planned Parenthood.
And those health care centers are double and triple the number of Planned Parenthood centers in some cases. Thank you so much, Alexandra DeSanctis, staff writer for National Review. Finally tonight, the Swiss guards in charge of protecting the Pope at the Vatican turn, I love this number, like here in the U.S. we turn like 75 or something. They turned 513 years old today, and they received a present. Look. I love this video. Okay, on the left, their new hats. On the right, their old ones. These new black helmets are made of 3D printed plastic. Talk about coming into the 21st century. The guards are releasing a video series that you're seeing on their work. And to be a member, one must be a Swiss citizen, practicing Catholic, and have already completed military service. And I think no women, right? Right? Okay, those are 4 things. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter and at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.